So I'm really excited about today's webinar for a number of reasons. First, we have Bob Power, who is our client at Silicon Labs. We have Allison Brown, who is our client partner. We have Prakash Govind, who is our solution architect. And we're going to be talking not only about how we solve these content problems in a very short time, but I'm going to begin with talking about generative AI and why content curation, content management, content hygiene is so important to that. So let me go ahead and jump in. By the way, I'm very proud to tell people that I have a new headshot. Okay, if you've seen this before, you would say, wow, that guy does not look like that anymore. And here's my old headshot. Here we go. I can show you that. That's what was on there for a long time. That was 7 years ago. So I one time looked like that, but I got a new headshot, and that is really what I look like. Anyway, as you can see, with good lighting and a good photographer. But also I am author of the AI-Powered Enterprise. And for those of you who haven't seen a copy of that, let me know and send me your mailing address and I'll get a copy out to you. Again, Bob, want to do a quick 30-second, 20-second intro, and we'll do the same with Allison and Prakash.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Seth. I'm really excited to be here to share with people what we've done and how we've partnered together. I've been VP of Engineering at Silicon Labs for about 10 years. Came in through an acquisition of a Boston area startup called Ember. Managed a team up to about 300 people. And then about a little over a year ago, I transitioned into a new initiative called Scilabs University. And that's how Seth and I and Allison and Prakash came to know each other. So excited to talk more about this. And yeah, there's a plug for my cyclist team there. So I ride the PanMass Challenge. It's an amazing event, and all the money goes to the Dana-Farber. So
I know we have supported it in the past. We'll support it again. I encourage everyone to support that. Allison, quick thumbnail.
Sure, thanks. Hey, everybody. I'm Allison Brown. I'm a client partner with Early Information Science. And yeah, 23 years in the industry. I've upped my starting age to 15 now, is when I've started in this practice with information architecture, from data to technologies. And as you can see, all kinds of different industries. And also, it's been a great time working with Bob. I can't wait to get into it as well.
Prakash.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Prakash Govind. I played the role of technical architect for the project. And yeah, it came together all in 3 months, and we implemented a solution which was very exciting to see get launched and used. But yeah, I've been in this field for, again, over 20 years and working with Seth for about the same amount of time. Mm-hmm.
You've been in the field. I think it's been over 20 years that we've been working together, but who's counting?
That's true. That's true.
We don't want to date ourselves. So recording, as you guys know, we'll try to keep it, under an hour and try to have some time for Q&A. We do want your input, so there are a couple of polls that we'd like to get your feedback on. And with that, I'll just go through a quick agenda. I'm just going to very briefly say who EIS is. I'm going to talk about generative AI because that is such a hot topic these days, and everybody thinks, oh, I want just ChatGPT for all my content. And I'm going to talk about why that is not as simple as people say. Lots of vendors are jumping onto this bandwagon. Everybody's piling on. Everybody has a solution, and it is much trickier than you imagine. And there's a very specific role for content architecture and knowledge architecture. We didn't do that at Silicon Labs, but we are prepared to do that as soon as they're ready to move forward. But we'll talk about those principles. We're actually working on a proof of concept right now with a life sciences firm that illustrates how you can actually use your own content to ask natural language questions, but it does require a content architecture. You're not going to get the same results. So we'll talk about that. We'll get into the training content chaos at Silicon Labs. We'll talk about how Bob communicated the value of content information architecture. We'll get into some of the project mechanics. Hopefully we won't bore you too much on that, and talk about how we made these abstract concepts more concrete for people by showing them how to implement this in MVPs, minimal viable products and iterations. And then we'll talk about how we can get you started if you'd like. Early information science has been around for 25 plus years. I should say started in the 90s, maybe I should say that. It started at the turn of the century, right? But our tagline is making information more usable, more findable, more valuable, and that cuts across lots of areas. Product data, lots of large product catalogs. We've had multi-year relationships with our clients doing knowledge initiatives. We have a year-long engagement with one customer to do a global knowledge program. And that's preparing them for generative AI applications and large language model applications. And we also have a lot of customers across industries, so financial services, manufacturing, B2B, all sorts of things. And and let's just talk for a moment about generative AI. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we do have a lot of content. But generative AI, for those of you who are at least familiar with ChatGPT, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that it's this magical thing that seems to have this wonderful capability of answering questions in a very human-like and a very conversational way. But at the end of the day, if it does not have the data, we hear this term called hallucinating, meaning it'll make up the answer. And that's just the nature of the beast, because what it does is it creates new content. It creates new original content by learning patterns in language and by understanding that learned knowledge generates that content, but it's learned knowledge about language, about relationships, about concepts. So what this means, it is not a copy of the data, it's not retrieval, but it means that the knowledge of the enterprise has to be referenced by the technology, right? And we can't just push it up into ChatGPT because we'll lose our proprietary content. So we have to have another way of doing this. And that part is what's really interesting. So again, large language models are trained on publicly available content, right? That's the thing behind when you hear GPT 3.5, GPT-4, BERT, Lambda. These are all large language models, and then they can be fine-tuned for specific domains and for specific topics to improve those types of conversations. What this means is we need to train it on a more focused data set and conversational data that helps us understand that desired topic, that desired domain. What it means is the model has to learn the knowledge and terminology relevant to the domain. And that is how it's going to give you accurate responses and contextually appropriate responses. And we have to have an audit trail with that. So what does it mean for content management? Well, content and knowledge management are needed to make sure that a bot has access to the right information that can provide those responses. It has to have that knowledge. It has to identify the knowledge and expertise needed for it to function appropriately, right? We have to design the knowledge base with an information architecture that supports that need. And I'll tell you what that means in just a moment. So imagine that you have a query. What you can usually do with a large language model is you can have it process that. And what it does is it basically understands intent. It's like utterance classification. When you build any chatbot, you have lots of different ways of expressing the same idea. My password doesn't work. I'm locked out of my computer. I forgot my username. I forgot my password, blah, blah, blah. All means password reset, right? Very simple example. But that's utterance classification. A large language model does the same thing with concepts. Think of it as a thesaurus on steroids. It says, okay, you have all these different ways of phrasing your questions, but fundamentally, we convert it into a common format, and it becomes converted into a mathematical representation of that concept, of that query. And that's presented to what's called a vector database. I won't get into all the details of that. I actually have a white paper I'm working on. It talks all about vector databases and embeddings and all of that. But we can use that query. We can say, okay, generate a response based on your language understanding, large language model. And what that will do is it'll give you answers based on publicly available information, or we can still process the query and then we can retrieve the response based on an organizational knowledge or content source. So for a highly regulated industry, for an industry with proprietary content, this is how you have to do it. You can't simply And some people say, oh, with prompt engineering, you simply upload your reference content. Well, that will lose that will release your content, your proprietary content to the world. So you can't do that. Okay. And so what happens is if we do it with our proprietary content, we can still use the LLM, we can still use the ChatGPT-like functionality to make that response conversational, okay? But if it does not, compromise any IP, it doesn't expose any of that to the world, right? Which is super important. The regular way of doing this uses publicly available information. And again, we want to be able to process those results, process those queries, process those results, but use our own content in order to do this. And this is the key. This is the critical nature of this. And I'm going to show you why you need a content architecture and you need metadata to do this, right? I always say there's no AI without IA. That was the phrase I coined, industry catchphrase I coined many years ago when I wrote an article of the same name. Been used a lot in the industry. And the whole idea is, what is a knowledge architecture? What is information architecture? Just like if you're going to build a house, you don't just start digging foundations, digging holes and boring foundations. You have a design, right? You have a design for the foundation and for the framing and the HVAC and the plumbing and the electrical and the renderings. You need the same thing when we build our information house. And so there's a lot of different components to that. I won't get into that today, but there's taxonomies, there's metadata, there's content models. But what we're doing is we're building this in such a way that we can retrieve information in the context of our problem and who we are, what are our tasks. And when you look at any experience, whether it's a customer experience or an employee experience, and this is a customer example, it's always a knowledge journey. People are always asking questions and seeking answers to their problems, right? So we need to be able to do this in such a way that gives us the context of a response in our request, right? So here's what happens. If I have a product manual and I want to know what a specific error code means, well, what would I do? How would I get that error code? I would need to know something about the product. Now, let's say I have a big product manual. The product manual, we don't want to give people a product manual. We want to give them the answer to the product manual. So that product manual gets broken up into components. There's metadata applied to that product manual, but there's metadata applied to the individual components. So if I get a situation where they say, I need to install a modem, well, first of all, what modem do you have? Okay, so we need to make sure we have the content tagged with modem, with the model, right? I have model 2960. Okay, great. Here are the installation settings for model 2960. Now, again, I can get that if I have that metadata on my installation segment, right? That answer has to have that metadata. And if I get an error code of 50, well, what does an error code of 50 mean? Well, first of all, I know it's the model 2960, but I have to have the troubleshooting steps tagged with that error code. So again, this context is required, the type of information, whether it's an installation guide, a product modeled error code, these are all things that are provided by metadata. So the content type is a product manual, and you can see that highlighted in green. The content type in this case is troubleshooting, right? Because we have two different contexts. We have the installation material. That also is another piece of content. And then it gets tagged with the model number, right? The product name is the 2900 series. The model is the 2960. And again, all of that metadata. And here's the error code. The error code has to be tagged. So the whole idea is that we can't get this information from a large language model unless we feed it that information. And the knowledge architecture, the content architecture is required so that each of these components has context. It doesn't do it magically. We have to be able to do this. And a lot of the research that I've come across has always talked about chunking content. Well, that's our fundamental premise about create once, publish everywhere. I've talked about that before. I don't really have time to talk about it today, but I want to get into the meat of this presentation. But this is just to say that content curation, content management, content architecture, knowledge architecture are critical to using these large language models. Just think of them as pre-processing the query, post-processing the output for conversational interactions, but the content itself has to be retrieved in context. And the large language model will not know that context unless we provide it. So this is the idea, large language models, there's lots of different kinds. It's not just GPT-3, GPT-4, there's others, but those are generalized. Then we have specific industry knowledge models, which help understand terminology. Now, the generalized language models are getting better. They are understanding these domains, but you still do need some specialization. And then we have the ontology of the organization, which is the company-specific vocabularies, the company-specific metadata. This is how we tag it with our product model, our error codes, our installation materials, right? Even if that stuff is public information, in order to use this kind of a processing, we need to have that enterprise-specific terms. And many times these specialized industry language models are too big, right? We have to trim them down. Let's see how I'm doing for time. I'm right on time. Okay, so generalized language models are about an understanding of the world, but they don't use your IP. And that does not give you competitive differentiation. Standardization on a large language model gives you efficiency, but differentiation gives you competitive advantage. And that's what you have to think about. That content that's ingested can be used as a reference source. And if the content is not there, the system can't provide an accurate answer. And you can train these things and set up certain parameters that say, if you don't have the answer, don't make it up, right? You can specifically inform it, and you can set what's called the temperature parameter, which is higher. If it's 1, it's very creative. It's 0, it's not creative. And because again, it's generating, right? And it's generating based even on the response that it's retrieving, it can still generate variations. This means content databases are critical to these tools. Metadata applied to the content become additional signals. They become part of what are called embeddings, right? When you embed this, when you bring this into a database, which is called a vector space. But again, getting the answer to the support question requires that we have the metadata, product name, model, version, etc. And this, again, gets ingested into the generative AI application as a localized vector store, and the metadata becomes part of the embeddings, meaning the metadata is part of that mathematical representation of that information so that there are additional clues. Otherwise, it just doesn't know. It can't know. So I have a first poll here, and then we jump into the presentation. Carolyn, do you want to put this poll up? You missed this poll, Carolyn. I had added this poll. I think we missed it. All right. Well, we'll skip this. I did want to know whether people understood this, but this is the second poll. All right. So let's get into the second poll. I wanted to know if anybody had an understanding of content management related to ChatGPT. Sorry, I should have been more explicit. But where are you right now, right? Where are you? Oh, so I see some companies have very mature processes for very high value content. That makes a lot of sense, right? And maybe this departmental level. But the point here is you're going to have to increase that maturity if you're going to use large language models. Now, again, another question could be, are you planning on using large language models? We'll set up a separate webinar on that topic completely. But here, I just wanted to make that case for why content management is important. Then I really want to understand whether people, and you can put into the question and answer in the prior poll, where are you? Does leadership understand the role of content with large language model or ChatGPT types of applications? So put that in your Q&A, but let's end this poll. So it looks like, and I can share the results. So it looks like a lot of you have no structure, and that's not uncommon. That's not uncommon. Or departmental level standards, but maybe there's no compliance. Some of you have mature processes. That's great. That's going to set you up for success. And some say none of the above. Just give me the none of the above answers. Let's see. We are here to see chat is disabled. More focused data set. I'm hearing from my developers that LLMs do not typically ingest metadata or front matter, and they are unable to read a hierarchical taxonomy. And so they're pushing back on us using taxonomy to organize our content. that we then be ingested into the LLM. How would you respond to that? I would respond to, how will your content be able to, how will your LLM be able to understand the specifics of your product information? And it can only do that with metadata. Don't worry about a hierarchical taxonomy. Just worry about, the hierarchy can be the metadata field and then the vocabulary, right? Don't worry about the hierarchy. You just want the clues. But we can take that offline as well, Dana, if you'd like, and we can talk about that in detail. And I'd be happy to have a briefing with your folks to explain this concept, because there's really no other way to do it. And what's going to happen is people will experiment with this, and they will get it wrong. They're not going to get the results. Here's another comment. Most of our peers internally are chasing the hype and surprised to learn of the information design components necessary to succeed. That is going to happen over and over again. And again, we've seen it before. Anytime there's a new result. I'm sorry, I thought I was sharing the results. Maybe I wasn't. But again, this is not atypical. This is not atypical. So let me turn it over to Silicon Labs. And Allison, do you want to tee up the conversation and then hand it over to Bob?
Sure. I've got slides on this one later as well. We did a 3-month rapid project to get the foundational content infrastructure in place for Silicon Labs. I was a client partner, Prakash solution architect. So we've all got slides here. Bob, do you want to tell us about Silicon Labs and take it away?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Allison. So Silicon Labs is a semiconductor company with a high focus on wireless technology and a high focus on software to enable that. I like to tell people we have a strong learning culture. So we've got a lot of really smart people designing semiconductors and software, and they're willing to share. But when I was asked to lead this effort, one of the first things I did was do an inventory and found out that we had a big problem. We had content everywhere. It wasn't organized, it wasn't architected, it wasn't shareable, it wasn't findable. So this is kind of what led to thinking about this project. So this was, chaos is my term, by the way, that wasn't Seth's. We just did a...
It's a valid term of art, Bob.
Yeah.
We use that as well. Yeah.
We just, every year we do something called a technical symposium, and this year's theme was engineering without chaos. And I thought that Silicon Labs University's problem fit right in with that theme. So on the left-hand side there, you see we had training everywhere. We had it stored in Confluence, Zoom, Life-Size, SharePoint, Dropbox, NFS, old system called Twiki. And basically, like, if you did that training for your team, you probably knew where it was, but no one else in the company knew where it was, how to get it. So we were doing the hard part in some ways. We were taking all this effort and initiative and developing the content, but we had nowhere to share it. So that was causing duplication of effort, things getting stale and out of date, inability to find things. And we do a lot of surveys in my company, like many of you, and we use Great Place to Work as our employee satisfaction, and training was consistently very low marks and low rated. And that's why the CEO wanted to raise the visibility and to try to solve the problem. So this was one of our underlying issues. This is just a very high level, a couple of systems we work with. Content management system, that's really what I would call the back-end tool. It's a single source of truth for all content. It's where we can organize, store, categorize. It's where we can tag things. It's cloud-based, access control. There's workflows if you want to put governance on here. There's versioning, and then it allows us to publish to one or more channels. So first thing we knew is we needed a content management system. And one of the beauties is we already had one. So we had SharePoint. We weren't really using it in this way. It had a bit of a bad rap within our company because it was kind of used for things maybe it wasn't intended. But after some research, I learned it's a really good content management system with a lot of the right tools. And we were not promoting it as a place the learner would go, but really the back end. So CMS was great. We didn't have to go write an RFP and discover new systems and bring those up. So we were good to go.
And I do want to make the comment that people don't like SharePoint mostly because of the way it's architected or not architected. It's really about, you can do anything with it. You can use it as a backend. You can change any user experience, but it's usually the experience which is driven by the architecture.
Yeah, I agree. Next slide. So just talk a little bit about metadata, and this is just the way that I came to think about things. So metadata, as I think Seth mentioned, it's really just data about data. So provides a context, it helps you organize, find, and understand it. So I gave an example here. We have a course called Fundamentals of Thermal Noise, and there's a lot of data about that course. It has a title, it has an author, it has various topics, dates, and classification, and skill level, duration, etc. And we have many more fields, but that later comes into play when you're trying to search. You may want to say, I'm looking for beginner level IC design courses, or someone else might want to see every course that Harry Nyquist ever developed, right? So people come at this in different ways. And then taxonomy is really just a structure used to organize your content into categories. And one of the things I learned from working with Early was you need to have a single organizing principle for your taxonomy. So Silicon Labs University chose training topic, and it provides a controlled vocabulary. So this isn't ad hoc. You know, I might say integrated circuit design, someone else might say IC design, and you can quickly see you'll get an explosion of terms and it gets unmanageable. So we have our taxonomy under a governance system. There's an approval process, and we built that up with a lot of help from, Prakash and Allison and others, and lots of internal folks. So that's kind of the high level terms that we think about. Next slide.
By the way, I wanted to, I was calling out the confidentiality. We do have permission to use this outside of Silicon Valley.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And I did genericize a little. So those of you that know signal processing probably recognize Harry Nyquist's name. He was someone that invented that whole art and science. The next thing is we needed learning management systems. And this is where our learners would go to find what they're looking for. Their manager might assign a course. So this is a different system that you can administer training and deliver it, engage with the users, and then we track, and we want to make sure, you know, we have an internal requirement that people need a certain amount of training hours per quarter and per year. And, you know, managers can go check how their team's doing against that KPI and make sure, you know, so we have reporting and things like that. And then finally, integration. So these systems need to talk to each other. So our CMS needs to publish to our LMS and potentially other publishing systems. We may want to have HR systems where we're keeping track of goals. So our systems all kind of tied in together. Next slide. And this is a bit of an eye chart, but it's really our flow for courses. So we have a system where anyone in the company can either request training or offer training. We don't do it all, right? We look at the request, see the relevance. And so this is just a system that we use. We used something called Jira. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And we just created a workflow and a process with various approvals. And we have something called pillars of learning. So R&D training falls under one organization, people team training falls under another, and we try to unify our processes and our workflow because we have a lot of shared resources as well. We have some video editors and instructional designers and LMS admins, you know, all sharing. So we tried to have this workflow, so it made things very clear. So the team helped us with this. Next.
And that is a critical piece of this, right? Because otherwise, you know, you do want know, people need to know where they can get their information at each stage. Otherwise, it's acts of heroics, it's emailing back and forth, it's I don't know where the latest version is, oh, Joe has it. So the workflow processes are completely core to having a good content hygiene.
Yes. And this is just kind of a high-level block diagram tying it all together. We see in the middle there, that's our CMS. That's really where the bulk of the heavy lifting went. I mentioned it was SharePoint. That's where we store all of our content. And we have a goal that if a piece of content was developed 5 years from now, if someone wants to change it, I should be able to go and get all of the original artifacts, maybe project files, graphics, and et cetera, and I should be able to update and reproduce that course. And then from there, the content may undergo transformation to get into different systems, because these systems sometimes have a little bit of dissonance between them. And, we try to store our metadata and taxonomy consistently, but the way Workday thinks of taxonomy is a little bit different than, say, the scilabs.com thinks of taxonomy. So sometimes we have to do a transformation. But the idea is, you have the content stored in one place and you can publish into multiple places. And then, of course, you want to keep track of where you've published, when, what version, et cetera. So when you go back later to update, you can, have a record of all of your publishing interfaces.
And someone did have the question of what the LMS was, and it's Workday. And there are challenges with the integration because Workday could not leverage all of the metadata structures. So there had to be some compromises in there.
Yes, exactly. And someone mentioned one of my favorite terms with Workday is that Workday does not have a hierarchical taxonomy. So we had to come up with a bit of a compromise, presenting kind of a flat taxonomy and kind of using multiple fields to try to give you the same effect. So, we still use the same key terms and everything, but there was a little bit of dissonance there. So that's our whole system. And then, just say a word about the approach we took. I had a pretty strict deadline because the real job was to develop content. The real job was not to develop the system. So when I went and pitched this to my boss, our CTO, I said, look, we have to take a bit of a diversion. And he basically said, okay, don't turn this into a career. We need to move fast. So I kept saying to Early, look, I have a specific need for Scilabs U, but let's not do it in a vacuum, right? So we looked at other groups and other teams that had tagging and taxonomy, and we built something that was scalable, but we did it for Scilabs U. So by doing this, as we started involving people in training, we started getting questions like, hey, what's going on over there? Because I have a content management problem as well. And they wanted to learn what we did, how we did it, where we did it, what the architecture was, and how they could get on board. So I think, as my boss said, he also runs IT, he said, so many initiatives start top down and it's a push and you just get resistance. And this was a project really that we solved a specific problem. We did it in a scalable way. And now we actually just kicked off a second project with Early, where we're bringing in 4 other teams to bring in different content types, and we'll have to expand our system, but it's getting real traction. So that was a really nice side effect of what we did and the way we did it. We did it quickly. We hit it out of the park for our needs, but then we had a lot of people looking and saying, hey, how can I get on board?
And that has always been the way we've seen great success with these things, is that you start with a narrow scope and a really defined departmental approach or process approach. And then people go, huh, what are you doing over there? Wow, that's pretty cool. Can I get some of that? And it's happened. We do this in global organizations where you have multiple business units, multi-billion-dollar, large global enterprise, huge, catalogs of information and products. And you shampoo, rinse, repeat. And each time you're building some capability. But as Bob said, we built this in a way that was extensible, right? It was scalable and extensible. So when you do these things, you want to design with the rest of the organization in mind, recognizing you go very deeply into this process, knock it out of the park, and then you use that to build momentum in other parts.
Exactly.
I loved your success metrics, Bob. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, we use Great Place to Work. It's pretty popular employee satisfaction index. And we just weren't moving the dial on training. You know, it's hovering somewhere in the high 70s. I don't know if it ever hit 80, and it would go up or down a point. And we were earnestly
You're breaking up a little bit, Bob.
to solve this problem. We just did, third-party training material. Oh,
Go ahead, keep going, Bob. You were just breaking up for a
oh
second.
boy, sorry.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to turn off my video for now.
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Maybe that'll help. Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so anyhow, we launched Scilabs U. We talked about it, and we demonstrated where we're going and what we're doing, and we just so happened to have our Great Place to Work survey come out, and it went up 5%, and this was a massive shift. And then we did a pulse survey a couple of weeks ago. It's gone up another 1% or 2%. So we're going in the right direction. A lot of people are very happy. As I mentioned, we had a lot of training. We just didn't have it anywhere that people could find. So we've started using, the LMS now. So we had 149 courses that were targeted originally for the LMS. These were added at some pace of maybe 20 a year. And then a year later, we had nearly 600 courses in there. And a lot of this was legacy training that we put the time and effort into developing, but no one could find it. So that was really just due to organizing, finding, tagging, and making it available. No new content development, or I would say some of that. Most of that was not new. And then finally, we track training hours, and we're trying to drive this because, like I'm sure all of you, in knowledge management, if you don't invest in your people and their training, they'll get stale. If you hire new people, they don't know your system and processes and IP. So we really watch this. And just in about a year, we saw a 35% increase in training hours consumed per person on average. So that's a massive shift. So
This is huge.
early results, we're very happy. So summary, we now have a single spot to store everything. It's tagged, it's classified. We built a workflow. We publish and have it in a nice LMS. And there's lots of areas that we're applying lessons. We did this project very quickly. It was about 3 months from contract signing to having what I would call a very solid kind of 1.0 system up and running. We had the benefit of already having SharePoint. We had the benefit of having an LMS, so we didn't have to go purchase those tools. So it was really coming in, doing a deep dive, learning our challenges, our problems, our content type, helping to build the taxonomy, and then implementing it. So I'm going to try to go back on video. So yeah, very happy with the results, and it's we're seeing a lot of uptick and a lot of excitement for this.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Allison?
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like some of the stories are already told. This is our storytelling portion with Bob, and any Q&A about the traction that we got as we got into the project. It immediately got so much attention. Are there any specific situations or stories that you want to share with the group that we experienced?
Yeah. It really helped that we had executive level buy-in. So this is something that our CEO spoke about. This is something our CTO spoke about. So when I went to someone looking for help, they knew about this project. They knew it had visibility. They knew it had high level support. So I think that was really important. This wasn't an effort that started on the ground. I talked about bottoms up, but it was talked about as an important initiative. So there wasn't a lot of pushback. There wasn't a lot of resistance. We weren't replacing some other system. So as people were skeptical. This seems like a lot of work to build this taxonomy thing, and I would say it was more skeptical than pushback. But once people started seeing, how easy the system was to use, I think that's really key. It has to be, I think, Seth, I'm going to steal your line here. It has to be easier than your prior system. So even though, we have a little bit of overhead or a little bit of extra work, I think people realize now they can find things, right? And when we create a course, it's pretty straightforward. We have a dialogue. You plug some metadata in and you tag it, and then you upload the training material. And it might, if you have your ducks lined up, it might take 5 to 10 minutes. So yeah, a couple more minutes than just dumping it into a directory, but it's organized, it's findable. So I think those are some of the key things we did, that top level support, and then focusing on making it really easy. Yeah. Even, and Prakash knows, whenever we make an enhancement, we're always thinking like, okay, we can't make it harder. How do we keep it simple, even though we're adding new capability? And I think we've done a really good job of that.
That's great. And I know we're going to switch gears. I just want to have a quick poll here. How important is improving content to the organization? Just we'll take just a moment to take a look at that. Carolyn, if you want to put that up, that would be great. And then we're going to get into the mechanics of the project. Carolyn, can you get that posted? If not, we'll just move on. But let's see, you started with a single group. We're careful to make the taxonomy extensible for future projects. How did you get the information from metadata that you knew would be needed for other departments or products? Oh, here's the poll. So how important is this? So while I'm answering that question, you can just quickly answer this question, the poll. How did we get the information from metadata that you knew would be needed for other teams? So I think the issue was, it was building the domain model of the big bucket organizing principles, and looking at some of the other stuff. We're doing this right now with the next group, a systems group at Silicon Labs. There are other groups that also want to participate. And what we're doing is we're keeping those groups in mind, and we're building the domain model so that it's shallow but broad. In other words, you're trying not to design yourself into a corner, and you're trying to keep in mind what can be applied to other organizations. But it's very important to start with that narrow focus, but then keep in mind that you're going to need to extend this throughout the organization. I'll only give this another minute or two, but it looks like some awareness, not a priority. Okay, some organizations have, it's an enterprise priority with budget and executives and attention. That's what the rest of that question says. Some departmental levels. But again, the idea here is this is super, super important for the organization. Let me go ahead and share the results. This is super important for the organization. Oops. I don't know, failed to share a poll. Another poll has started, or share error. Shared error 4402. I wish I had a large language model that would tell me what shared error 4402 was, but I'm trying again. But anyway, this is not unusual, but I'm glad to see some people looking at it as a priority. And if we can tie it to the conversational AI and generative AI, that's going to get support. Otherwise, they're going to be wasting tons of dollars on this. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and close this out. So, Allison, you want to quickly take us through some of the steps to this process and the mechanics? We don't want to. Sure, go ahead.
Add one specific thing to Robert's question. So I think you covered it at the high level, but if you remember, I said the guidance to the team was, I need to move fast with Scilabs U, but I don't want to do it in a vacuum. So what I mean by that is, we actually reached out to other teams. So TechPubs was a great team, and they had some kind of content organization, and they were looking at all of our products. And we actually looked at our website and how it was organized. And we actually did a little side project there to help them with their setup. So even though it was Scilabs U and training, we took a broader look, and then we came back and narrowed it down.
Yeah, and you can do quick wins for those other parts of the organization. Once you're in there, you can see some obvious things that don't entail an entire project, but entail some fixes. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sure. So I'll pick it up here. Even though, again, Bob stole all my thunder. We demonstrated value quickly. He already explains what we did. Here's the one slide that says how we did it. And as Seth says, it's a proven methodology. This methodology being used across domains exactly the same way, starting with that diagnostics. And Bob's, your last line was right at the end, scale to a broader audience. The very last bullet is exactly where we are right now. So this map worked. So we did it in 3 months. We spent time with Bob and team, and at the end of the presentation, how we got together, what we did as a very first step is having that initial conversation about what the situation is. We'll give the link and the numbers to contact us for that. We did that and moved straight into the assess and diagnose. The quick wins, as Bob said, were already there. There was an existing platform that we can use, and with the interviews that we did with the team, we were able to identify exactly what we needed to do very quickly. Moved right into a design phase, the taxonomy, and I have some slides that kind of shows how the project went and some examples from each of these areas, getting that implementation of their attribute schema in SharePoint, and governance. We're exactly where we were hoping to be very quickly with this program. So this is just a snapshot of the project plan. 3 months, we had 3 major activities. We had 4 weeks for the analysis and the requirements. We did it agile. We started in on that design right away as we were learning, and parallel, we're solutioning. So having a system in place is definitely an accelerator to this, but if not, it was the content that we were spending most of our time on, what it should look like, how it's going to work, learning the business and the topics. So that was just super fun activity. Most of the slides that I'm going to show are about the time we spent with the team and some of the activities that we did together.
I'm just looking at this, realizing it's a 1-year anniversary from when we started that project.
It is. Happy anniversary, Bob.
Months, and then we did support, and we did some iteration.
Yes.
Pretty quickly. Go ahead. And there's a question that I'll hold for just a moment, but keep going.
Sure. And you want to take the question? This is just a snapshot of what we heard.
Keep going, and then we'll
Okay.
finish with this question in just a moment.
Yeah. So the stakeholder interviews, everything that Bob said, everyone was saying the same thing. We got big things out of it, that there were large numbers of content sources. Some sources were difficult to access or use. The same teams didn't use the same primary source. The time that they were spending was overwhelming. Just lots of big things came out of the stakeholder interviews. And on the next slide, we organized what we heard. We didn't just take everything we heard and put it into a sheet and start doing things. Of course, we organized all of the themes of what we heard into some very specific tasks that we had to go after. We talked about governance, where the tool was the problem, where the taxonomy or navigation was the problem, findability, was it training, workflows, governance. So we broke all of these down into themes, played back what we heard, and explained to the Slabs team why it matters in our design and what we're doing, so that everything that everyone contributed to the project, you can actually see the outcome. It all ties into what we delivered in taxonomy and the schema.
And what's important about that is that people's voices are heard, their fingerprints are on it.
Yeah, and we can move quickly through these next few, just some examples of the types of things that we did, looking at the actual content. We did demos with a lot of the stakeholders as well, just so we can understand not just the content and the metadata, but their experience. How much are they clicking? How far are they going? Are they getting, what kind of results are they getting when they get there? Because all of that matters in the new process.
And this was pointing out that you'd get inconsistent experiences with areas.
Yeah. Yeah. So a summary of some of the initial findings with the inventory. There were places for growth in all of the areas and the people that we talked to. We had content in multiple places. The good news is we were able to identify all of those key sources where they were in that inventory, and including the trainings. There were a couple of taxonomies that were in place that we needed to consider to bring into a single navigation taxonomy. We talked about what what was happening in Workday versus what was happening everywhere else, trying to pull that together. And the supporting documents and the search logs, we took a look at those as well and came up with a list of key observations and recommendations to go after. Yeah, another activity is the workflow working sessions. So it can be difficult. I was so glad that Bob had a focused area with the LabVIEW to figure out who's doing what and what it really takes to do a single task. So we broke it down a couple of different ways with what a person's doing, step by step, role by role, system by system, so we can see that there's a 70-step process for something that you might think is, I'm just going to search for this and get it, or I'm going to contribute. It turned out to be quite extensive. So we started to bucket those themes as well. And we also showed it in diagrams. So we took the Rubik's Cube approach to looking at how things were working to come up with the future state workflow. And the schema design, fun stuff. Looking at all of the topics and the data and metadata that we collected during the inventory, quickly finding some opportunities and problems to solve, which led to a lot of the frustration and what we heard from the stakeholders during the interviews, is that things are described differently. This is just a snapshot of some metadata where there's an availability date and creation date and date created. These things make things not map and difficult to find. And if you, that mental model is one way, these are the kinds of things that get missed. So just some examples of the things that we went after in schema design to solve. And our fun topics salad. So everything that we heard that need to go into the taxonomy and metadata, pulling it all together and showing how they're all relevant, how they relate, and how they can come together. These kind of color-coded boxes against the pillars just kind of show that there are similar and overlapping topics throughout the organization that need to go into this single taxonomy that we eventually delivered.
Prakash, this is.
I'll hand it over to Prakash.
Yeah. The summary to go through this quickly. It's kind of.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so starting with we already understood what the chaos was, as Bob explained it, not being able to find the system. And then Allison went through the processes of talking to the stakeholders, or doing a content audit and an analysis of what it was, the workflows that we just saw, and then building the taxonomy design from what we have heard so far, and also developing the schema. But it all comes together in a system. This is very important to make, this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, right? So whatever we have designed in the taxonomy and the schema, we need somewhere to put it, to host it. And SharePoint, like Bob said, was a good environment to do that. Some of the advantages of using SharePoint here was they already have some of the constructs, like the term store and the content type definitions. So many of these can map into SharePoint, but and it also becomes an anchor for the implementation. So once we implement it in a system, then people can get around it, and it also surfaces the common mental model that we have extracted through all this work, and then expose it. So it is a very collaborative tool for further engagement with the team. Yeah. So that was an important part of the whole initiative.
Yeah, SharePoint is underrated in a lot of ways. It's based on the architecture and the experience. There's one more question, but you want to talk about this real quickly, Allison?
Oh, yeah. It's how to get started. The same way Bob did. We had a quick 30-minute chat initially, and we replied with a discovery document of our learnings, just with the overview that he gave us, the strengths and weaknesses of the current situation, some best practices, and, started to prioritize things and what we actually needed to do in this project. There's a link on this slide, and the slides are going to be provided. You can also email me directly and get you scheduled for that initial conversation.
So there was another question about other systems. Bob, I don't know if you're still here, but I think you answered it. The question was on what other tools. Was there a mention of tools besides SharePoint? And do you want to go ahead and mention that? Because there's a lot of
tools. Sure. So there are. So Yeah, I really apologize.
No worries.
Is this better?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'll leave my video on. Yeah, so SharePoint has something called the term store tool, and that's a tool to help manage metadata and taxonomy and content types. There was, as I think I briefly mentioned, we use Jira for our issue tracking, and that's how we created our flow. We use Confluence for content for course creation. So that's a collaboration space where multiple subject matter experts could come together. We use Workday Learning as our primary LMS. We also have something called Brainshark, which we're using as an external LMS. So if we wanted to share a training with a customer or partner, and there's reasons why we have two, I won't get into right now. And then we have several different publishing or course creation tools. Articulate is really popular in our world, so that's something called Storyline and Rise. There's two kind of tools that can create course content, and Brainshark also has authoring. Sometimes people use PowerPoint with voiceover, so we kind of try to accept a lot because we had a lot of legacy content. So those are the primary tools.
Sorry, unmuted. When you're doing this, you need to make sure that you're aligning the architecture throughout. Two more questions that we'll answer really quickly. One is, how did, during and after the implementation process from Gab, how did you evaluate the correctness, effectiveness of the solution? There's lots of iterative testing and evaluation, from conference room pilots to different types of testing. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you did? And of course, after the fact, there's always fine tuning. What else did you guys do to make sure that you were on track?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, it started working closely with the EIS team and then a few people from the Scilabs U team. So, Prakash would reach out and say, hey, I've got a working prototype of this feature. I'd like your feedback. We'd get together. Let's say generally it was 85% correct, and we'd have tweaks and tuning. Generally, like, we didn't get too far off track because we talked a lot. Prakash would say, here's how I'm thinking of implementing this. What do you think? And we would iterate before, he started developing, but then we would checkpoint, and then we would open it up to internal Scilabs U team, and we'd do our own testing, provide feedback. And then ultimately we would open up to what I call Scilabs U members. So these are the full team that can contribute. So that full team is about 100 people. So
constant iteration, constant feedback, constant adjustment. And one last question: what did you do when you find a vocabulary not matching up, like creation date? We had to map those together, and in some cases create new metadata schemas that just had to be implemented. And the system. You want to mention anything really quickly, Prakash, because we're right at the top of the hour?
Oh, that was a necessary mapping exercise because people say the same things in different ways, and bringing them together to have the common mental model was done through the mapping exercise. And SharePoint tool in the term store provides a way to mention the synonyms. So you can choose one term to be the preferred term, and all the other terms need not be lost in the mapping, but can be added on as a synonym.
And again, when it's a metadata field, you just have to map that together for, when you're doing reporting or you're doing searching. So there's a bunch of ways to do with that. We are exactly at the top of the hour. Well done, guys. I think we packed a lot of stuff into that hour. Thank you all so much. Thanks everyone for joining us today and hanging in there. We only lost a couple of people at the end, so that was great attendance, and I appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, please reach out. There's more reading. We'll send you this deck. There's our podcast. There's Allison and my information, but I would definitely take advantage of this offer, which is to set up a meeting and talk about your situation. And we can also talk about AI readiness. We have an offering around that to say, how is your content stacking up for generative AI? But anyway, thanks, everyone. We'll let you go. Appreciate your time, and we will talk to you next time.